Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the School of Self Worth. I am your host, Nicole Song. Today, I am so excited to share the journey of Laura Saldivar Luna. She is not only a powerful coach and the founder of Piñata Possible, she is someone I had the great honor of working with for the past year as a member of my Clear Calling Activator Mastermind. So, the mastermind is a year-long journey where we do big, expansive work on becoming a more powerful leader at work and in business. And the breakthroughs are seriously out of this world, like just so incredible. When Laura started with me, she was overwhelmed by her business and more one to one clients than she really had time for. And she wanted to learn how to scale her business through group coaching. So she actually had time for her family. She did that and so much more. Like the breakthroughs that she had and the wins that she had just go on and on. It's amazing. So make sure you stay tuned for this episode. And before we dig in, we only open up the mastermind once per year, and the time is right now. So if you want details for how to step into that next level of your leadership and continue your breakthroughs and go into that next stage in your business or in your career, DM me mastermind on Instagram at Nicole Song to get the application. I've got limited spots left. So DM me today, mastermind at Nicole Song on Instagram. Okay, friends, let's get into this amazing episode. Laura, I'm so excited to have you here on the School of Self Worth. Welcome.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm so excited to be here with you.
I feel like, usually I see you in a coaching context. So I want to be like, what are your wins? Because I haven't seen Laura for a couple of months. But we will get to the wins because I know there's so many of them. And what I would love, let's see, I'm listening in because Laura was a member of my mastermind this last year. And I want her to be able to share her whole story with all of you. So I'm curious, Laura, if you could kind of start with what got you to the place where you were considering joining the mastermind and just sort of like your journey and sharing that with people. And this is always about self-worth and worth and value. So I would love to hear any context around that as well. I know it's a very open question, but I would love to just, for you to get us started in like, who is Laura? And we want to know more about her.
Yes. Well, my name is Laura Saldivar Luna, and I am the founder of a transformational leadership coaching practice called Piñata Possible. And when I found you, Nicole, and found my way into your mastermind, I was about a year and a half into running that coaching practice. Now I will say that I'm running a coaching practice and running a company. But I think back then I said I was running an emergent thing that I had just begun. And I was in the very early nascent stages of building something that felt like a big, bold vision, but still felt very new. And I felt very stumbly as I was in that building process. And so after I had moved through my first year of entrepreneurship, a fellow entrepreneur friend of mine told me about having just completed your mastermind. And she mentioned all the growth that she had experienced through a year of working with you. And so I was looking at the time for a way that I could invest in building and growing my business through building and growing myself. And so talking with you, I remember the very first conversation I had with you, Nicole, where you were really listening so deeply for where I was getting in my own way. And you cared so much about me, even though we didn't really know each other in that first conversation, to mirror back to me where I was getting in my own way. And I'll never forget, you were talking to me about what's the cost of slow decision making. And so that always stayed with me. And it landed for me as just such an opportunity of what if I could get underneath why I am in my own way when it comes to decision making, plus other things, where was slow decision making impacting my business, but where was it also impacting other areas of my life? And so I came into the mastermind with you with real big hopes about the real big vision I had for growing my business. And on the other side of that year with you, now I can see really tangible results of having grown not just in my business, but in all areas of my life and leadership as a result. So, yeah, I'm coming to you today in a place of real thriving. I feel far less stumbly than I was compared to the first conversation with you.
That's amazing. Well, I'd love to take it back even farther because, as you know, the women listening are all crazy high achievers who are trying to figure out their next thing. And you had that whole journey too. So, would you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit more about your own journey to even opening your own business?
Yes. So my career path began in the field of education. I was a classroom teacher. I taught high school English and English as a second language. And then I moved into working in an education nonprofit called Teach for America. And I worked for this education nonprofit for 15 plus years. And I worked at the very beginning, entry level of the organization in their New York City headquarters. And then over time, grew through that organization all the way to the C level. When I completed my time at Teach for America, I left as the chief people officer. And so, having walked a very long journey through the different levels of leadership in that organization taught me a lot about leading teams, taught me a lot about how to set a vision and a direction and how to influence and inspire people to move collectively toward that vision. And I also realized just throughout every step of my career the deep passion I had for human beings thriving, for their potential to be realized, and the ways in which human beings could be surrounded by conditions within themselves and conditions outside of themselves where that potential would be limited. And what could I do, and how could I be of support in helping to redesign systems, whether in an organizational context or in that system of self, to help people break free of the limitations that they're dealing with and break through to new levels of power and possibility and progress toward the things they really care about. So, my whole career, from education to executive leadership to entrepreneurship, has always been guided by a deep belief in people. But I don't know that I could connect that thread so easily as I can now. Now all the dots make sense now that I'm on the other side of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the common thread.
It's always easier when you're on the other side of it than when you're in it. Well, because I'm curious, because I know there's a lot of women here who are probably thinking about leaving their jobs or thinking about, is there something else for me? And where would you say like the biggest challenge came? Was it like actually leaving your job? I actually have a couple questions around this, but first, in that window of when you decided you probably wanted to do something else, what was the biggest thing you had to overcome for yourself to actually leave? Because it's something where on the surface, people are going to be like, wow, you're so successful, you're doing such great work here. You probably have so much impact and a lot of say in what you do. And you're at the C suite level. Like, that's the dream, right? Like, what would make you want to leave that level of work to do something on your own?
Yeah.
And what was scary or hard about it for you? Like, what did you have to do to have that happen?
Yeah, it was a very scary time actually. I would use that word to describe it. It was scary, it was disruptive, and there was a lot of unknown. And I think at that time I very much looked at unknown and uncertainty as something to fear. Now I look at unknown and uncertainty as a place of possibility, as a place of creativity, as an open space or a blank slate to be able to redesign or design what it is that I really love and care about. At the time, though, I felt like I had been walking a very prescribed path of leadership, checking the boxes, doing the things that I thought one was supposed to do in growing a career in leadership. And when it got to the point where I felt like I had checked all the boxes and still felt a bit incomplete,
Mm,
still felt pretty depleted at the close of that journey, I started to ask big questions about, well, what's next and what's missing? Like, why am I still having this feeling of something being lacking in myself, something being lacking in my life? It was a very, very disruptive time, though, because ultimately why I left the organization was not necessarily my choice at that time.
mm,
This is part of the fascinating story. So I came into my chief people officer role really at the request of our CEO. And then I left that position also through a conversation with my CEO where we decided, you know what, I think there's a time now where the organization is ready for something different. And so we made the decision that I would leave that role, I would leave the organization, I would close my chapter. And for me, that felt like the end of a really important assignment, but it felt like a stepping into a part of the path that felt very scary and, and unknown because I had kind of reached the end of the line of what I was building up toward within that organization. And I remember I sat with a coach friend of mine and she said, "Well, that's great, Laura. You know, you've completed all the things you wanted to complete. There was really nowhere left that you wanted to go." And I thought, "Yeah, but I never really thought beyond what was going to come from there." And so it was very, very scary to sit with myself and say, okay, now with that part of the map and journey complete, what now? And so it felt very scary. It felt like I was a bit out of control. It felt like a lot of the things I had been building up and towards were starting to crumble and break down and disintegrate all around me. And I was not really sure at that time how I would begin to reintegrate it all.
mm. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like, there's the idea of what people think it's going to be like when you're making a big decision like that. It looks pretty cool and impressive on the outside, but on the inside, it can feel very, very confronting and
Yeah.
challenging. I'm curious for you then, like, what are some of the skills that you thought would help you in that transition from like the leadership skills you had? And then what are the ones that actually helped you?
Hmm. What I thought was going to help me were the tried and true and well practiced strategies I had built in a very traditional architecture and archetype of leadership. Work really hard, give my maximum effort to everything, try to give 110% at all times in all areas of my life, figure things out that I didn't know how to do, and push myself.
Mm.
What actually helped me
Yeah.
through that time, and what I think has contributed, not what I think, what I know has contributed to really exponential growth in my life, leadership, and what I've been able to build since then, is quite the opposite. It is building a new paradigm for leadership. It is a surrendering and letting go of control and making space within myself for creativity, for listening to the wisdom of my own body, for listening for clarity to arise, for then acting on when that clarity arises, as compared to past me, where it was follow the prescribed plan, agonize over every decision, seek perfection every step of the way. Now I am much more comfortable with emergence, with a sense of openness, a sense of trusting that if I don't know exactly how I'm going to figure out, just knowing that eventually I will. I have two kids, and my daughter often says, "That's a future me challenge or problem. Future me is going to figure that out. And so it's okay that I don't know how to figure it out right now. I know that future me has got it covered." And so I feel like these little bits of wisdom are all around if I really slow down to listen to them, and they arise within me. They are all around me to pay attention to. And so slowing down instead of speeding up and going harder, letting go, that has really made all the difference in
Mm.
the way I choose to lead now.
Beautiful. Well, you said that so well because I'm curious because this is also now bringing us to where you were when I met you and working into the mastermind because a lot of people do bring that kind of mentality into entrepreneurship and having their own business. And where would you say that had played out for you? Like, how did that? Because it probably worked for you. This is the thing that happens with stuff like that. Because obviously it worked for you to get a very high level job. And it probably worked for you for a while in the business
Yeah.
too. Like
Yeah.
what made you start to see like were you feeling that similar? I'm remembering our conversation where I felt like sometimes being in your own business was actually starting to feel a little bit like the job you had before, but I don't know if
Right.
that's accurate.
Right. I was just telling a friend of mine today, business, I now see it as my business works for me, not I work for my business.
Mm, mhm,
And that's a subtle shift. And I think I learned the hard way because in the first year of building my business, I had this mindset, this belief that in order to have more progress, I needed to work harder and I needed to do more. And so as someone who was running a coaching practice, that to me occurred in that very first year as how can I get more clients? More clients equals more success. More clients equals more opportunity to earn revenue for the business. More revenue equals opportunity for me to reinvest in the business and continue to grow it. And so what I started to do early on was be in the practice of getting more clients and trying to find really aligned clients and growing the client roster. What I found though, after applying that kind of mindset, is I had many wonderful clients and I had no space in my calendar to be able to do that kind of CEO thought time of where do I want to take this endeavor in the next 5 years? Where do I want to continue to build the infrastructure of the business so it's very regenerative and sustainable and has longevity and vitality to it? I wasn't doing those things because I was focused on execution in the day to day and delivering for my clients. That was kind of my first priority. And so I began to see that even though I had a large number of clients, it was coming at a cost. So even the revenue generation was now coming at a cost to my own personal happiness and well being. And it was coming at a cost to the long term success of the business and its long term sustainability. So, one of the changes that I learned through the mastermind work with you, Nicole, was how to really value myself, how then to value my time, how then to value the services I was providing, and how to look for very creative ways to center well being, health, and an integrated way of operating as a business so that it wasn't more equals more progress. It could be less, but better equals more progress. It could be more aligned opportunities equals more success. It could be higher rate of pay and service and charging for the services I was offering could equal growth in the business, not just more people added to the client roster. So I began to unpack some of those beliefs that were more people, more work, more hours in equals more success, to be able to see the kind of quality of work and the quality investment of my time could make all the difference.
Well, it reminds me too, because I remember you and I talked about this at one point that when you were in this like high, when you were still working for Teach for America, like you were taking calls from the car all the time, like when you were picking up your
Mhm.
kids, and like that was just making you kind of crazy. But then you had your own business and you still didn't have time for your family like you wanted
Yeah.
to. And was that one of the priorities for you, like in running your own business? Because I think a lot of people think, oh, like that's the dream. Because like right now I'm in a place where I'm adjusting my schedule with having a baby, and like what does that look like, and what kind of boundaries do I need to set, and what how much time do I actually really need to spend. And a lot of times I think people think we have a lot of freedom in terms of, okay, oh, that's so easy, you just get to pick how this goes. And I'm like, well, it's easy if you're not a high achiever who thinks you need to work all the time and get everything done, XYZ. And I also already, before I had my baby, I was already at 25 hours a week. And now I'm at a place where I've had to decrease even more, which has required me to be even more intentional and even clearer with my boundaries. And that is not an easy task. Like that requires a lot of effort and energy. And I'm curious for you, like what you saw for yourself around your own patterns, because it kind of sounds like it followed you right from the job you had into
Yeah.
entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, a couple of bits of my background as well as context for this. So I'm married. My husband and I have been married for 14 years, and we have two children. They are ages 9 and 11. And so when I was building my executive career, my children were very, very young, and I was working round the clock. I was often on call. I was on the road traveling every other week. It was a very intense time where I felt like many of the achievements I was getting in my career were actually coming at the cost of me taking time away from my family and from my children. So when I moved into entrepreneurship, I very much said, I need something different. I want a new paradigm for how I'm doing my life. I want my children, my husband, my family, my own sense of self worth and happiness and well being to really be at the center of how I design my business. However, what I started to see happening, and this is a different mindset that started to creep in, is I just loved what I was doing so much with my business building that I wanted to put in a lot of time and a lot of hours. And I would find that sometimes I was washing the dishes or I was, picking things up around the house and an idea would strike and I'd say, now I need to sit down and write about this, or now I need to go and record, these thoughts before I lose them. And so there was still a little bit of that feeling of being on call now because the ideas would flow in when they would flow in. And as an entrepreneur, as my own boss, I was really excited to be building what it was that I was building. And so I laugh now because sometimes I have to sit with the boss of this operation. I have to sit with myself to see again, how am I getting in my own way? How am I actually compromising the boundaries I said I was going to set and honor for myself? How am I competing with myself and the tensions within for what it is that I want to build? So I began to see, okay, really, I'm creeping back into old patterns here where I'm continuing to work round the clock and beginning to take time away from the things I have said are priority and really matter. So, over the last year, I've made a lot of strides to say, let me just sit with my calendar and how I'm spending time. Let me ensure that the priorities I've said matter to me are going into the time allocations first. So where does my movement of my body, which is a huge thing for me to have clarity and well-being and to be able to have good presence when I show up for the people that I'm serving and my partner and my children, where is that going in the calendar first as opposed to going into the calendar if time is left over? So I've started
Mhm.
to calendar things now and put it in a structured way where I'm moving my body, where I'm taking rest, where I'm spending quality time with my family at a micro level. So within a day, over the course of a week, within a month, within a quarter, and within a year. And so some of the old strategies I had for mapping my time allocations, I think I still utilize. I just utilize them differently, prioritizing and centering the things that I've said actually matter to me most as a first order when it comes to the planning.
Yeah, I love that. It is really true. I think a lot of times people think that like, oh, my calendar has control of me. And I'm like, well, who put that on the calendar? Like I know they're like my boss put it on the calendar. I'm like, yes, who said yes to that? Like we every time we think so much like other people are in control of our time. And it's such a big switch to realize that you are actually the one who has crafted that whole thing yourself, and that
Right.
you can actually do something with it however you want to do it. It doesn't have to
Right.
do like everybody else just gets to be on there because you've decided. So I love that.
Right.
Okay, great. Well, I know like we talked, I would love to hear. Well, let's just because I've put it off for a little bit. I'd love to hear some of the wins you had from the mastermind, and then let's talk about how you got to those wins. So, what are some of your biggest wins? Like, let's just be in celebration of like all the awesome things Laura did in the last year.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. And it's fun to relive some of those wins with you. There were some very specific wins that I wanted heading into the mastermind that I believe got unlocked.
Mhm.
And then there were some surprise
Those are
opening things
fun.
that happened
Yes.
over the course of the mastermind. So I feel like I got so much more than what I signed up for through my time journeying with you, Nicole, over that last year. One really big win that I attribute to this mastermind time with you is my husband and I had a home. We had a piece of real estate that was our very first home that we lived in together that we had held on to, even though we had moved away from it, many, many years ago. And we held it as a rental, and then the renters transitioned, and we were in this in between stage on if we were going to hold on to the house and re rent it or if we were going to sell the house. And I had a belief that holding on to the house was the right thing to do because it was an asset. And I thought in my mind, having an asset is a good thing. It's going to be something that accumulates wealth over time. So let's lock in and stick with this investment for the long term. At the same time, though, my husband was really raising good questions about, is it time to sell? Maybe we've held on to this long enough and the time for this investment has passed. And I just had a hard time thinking I could part with this thing that had been such a part of our investment portfolio and our lives personally for such a long period of time. And through the work of the mastermind, I began to see that I would come into our cohort sessions and our coaching sessions with the same repeated problem. I was still struggling with the house. And so to be held accountable every time, say out loud, I'm still in the same challenge. I'm still in the same challenge. I'm still, and this is still a block for me, was very illuminating to have to admit to myself, hey, this thing has been a thing for quite some time. And why can't I, back to my earlier point about the slow decision making, make a decision that feels really good and aligned for me when it comes to what we do with this house? And over the work that we did together, I think I realized that part of what the house was doing for us was actually draining our energy. It was draining my energy to have to maintain the house. It was draining our financial resources to have to make repairs to the house. It was draining our time to have to interface with different renters, real estate people, all of that. And I remember when it came time to pay the taxes for the house, I would think, oh gosh, like, are we even really getting a return on this investment? So to be able to step back and look at all of that and see what the more energetically aligned thing to do was to actually close that chapter, say goodbye to that house, honor that that house had done what it had done for us for that period of time. But to honor it didn't mean we needed to keep that chapter going. We could start a new chapter. So I remember in our mastermind, I was able to celebrate the big win of finally selling that house, receiving the resources from the sale, and then being able to reinvest those resources in a new way that felt way more energetically aligned, way more joyful for me, my husband, and our family, and allowed us to reevaluate and reset what was the priority when it came to what we invested in. And so, again, a big win for time and a big win for resources that wasn't just more of the same, it could actually be different. That was one of the biggest wins from the mastermind time.
I love that, and I remember when that happened, and it happened really early, like in the first 3 months, I think, of the mastermind that you really finally came to that decision, and then boom, once you started doing
Yeah.
it, it moved really quickly once it happened, and also, like you said, it's sort of interesting sometimes we come in, like, that wasn't your goal, like, you're like, "I'm in this to, like, work on my business," and we're
Right.
like, "Let's work on your house," and that happens sometimes because the house was blocking you from actually really being able to be in flow in your business as
Right.
well.
Right. No, yes. And then I began to see, oh, wow, it makes total sense that I'm the CEO of this business that I've started, but I'm also a real estate manager, so I've got a portfolio of many different jobs, if you will, that I'm doing. And so this one, by not making decisions, by not taking action on it, it's actually a drain on the whole portfolio of what I'm managing and how I'm leading. So it was a different area than my core business, but it was definitely an area of my leadership where those patterns were having connection points to other areas of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, what are some other ones that were big? I know you had some that were more tangible within the business itself too.
Yeah, within the business, one of the big shifts that I made. So, I mentioned earlier that I began building the business with growing my client list through a lot of one to one coaching. And I really felt one to one coaching was something I enjoyed. It's something where I felt tremendous impact. I felt like that was the thing I wanted to keep doing and keep growing. And at the same time, coaching people one on one reaches a cap in the amount of hours and time that can be spent, the number of clients that can be served in that way. So, one of the big shifts that I made in the business was to move from just exclusive one-to-one coaching into beginning to work with groups and group programming and running group programming in a way where I could bring many of the clients that I was working with together in a community where they were able to learn from and benefit from each other's wisdom and each other's coaching and each other's wins. And so I got to see that not only was it my support and my service to be able to coach people, but it was also a support and a service to hold a space where people could learn and grow and be in dialogue with each other. And so I could teach and I could coach and I could offer practices and then allow people to be in that practice together. And so that was a way more sustainable way to be able to utilize my time to serve a larger number of people. And people were sending in great feedback about the wins they were unlocking and getting from that experience because they loved being in community with each other. So I began to see that I could build new lanes in my business for different types of services that I could offer. I also looked at some of the contracts and partnerships I was working with organizations. So I do a bit of consulting and deep partnership with organizations where I'm designing and facilitating things in an organizational context. And I began to see that there were ways I could go deeper with the partnerships I had and find new levels of impact with them that were for increased investments, increased scalability of the services I was able to provide, and then increased alignment for me because the more context and work we would do on repeat, the more momentum we could build in the results they were getting organization wide. So I might go from working with a CEO to then working with a leadership team to then working with the entire organization. And that kind of transformation for the whole organization was just the ripple effect and the cascade of deepening that partnership over time. So again, not necessarily more organizations, but more depth with the partnerships that I had. So those are two other really big wins for sustainability and depth of impact, where I could scale back the number of people, but at the same time, more people impacted and more depth of impact throughout an entire organization, for example.
Yeah, and then give us like some of the concrete part. Like, were you working fewer hours doing it this way? And then like increasing the number of people, increasing your revenue? Like, did you see like percentage growth or like, whatever? What happened in that side of your business as well?
Yeah, there was a particular type of work I was doing, I recall, where I noticed that the payment I was getting for that type of service was about half of what I would charge if I were running that similar kind of program independently on my own. So I went
Mm.
from working in house in organizations through established programs they had to saying, let me actually create my own programs and invite people from those organizations to be part of the programs I'm creating. So not only did that give me more creative freedom and more spaciousness to be able to design something I thought would really move the needle for my clients, but it gave me an opportunity to reset my pricing. So in some cases, this was double or triple the revenue for the same hour spent of work. So it was less work, less time allocation, but for more investment and more revenue for the business, which ultimately was this beautiful cycle of sustainability for me to be able to say, how can I find these very aligned partnerships that I either create or can connect with in organizations where I'm genuinely offering what I have to offer that's going to be of service, as opposed to applying for and going into their context, trying to meet their mold that they are asking for. So a lot more power and choice and agency on my part, and the two times, three times revenue as a result of those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like such a no-brainer, right? When you explain it that way and we talk about it. And I know that like that's a lot of what we worked on with you is just like getting you to be like, it's actually okay for me to leave these
Yeah.
relationships. And not that the relationship is over, it's just like over in that particular way. So
Right.
that you could do things that made more sense for you or more aligned for what you wanted and actually allowed you to grow your business.
Right. Yeah. Talking it out with you now in this way, Nicole, I don't think I would have ever said it in this way, but I think through the mastermind, I got more comfortable with completion. It's okay to
Mm.
complete things. As a high achieving woman, as someone who grew up in executive leadership, as someone who grew up in a culture and set of values, I identify as Latina. So there are many cultural elements where I feel oftentimes the pressure to want to be of service, to want to deliver great things, to give it my all, I find that getting comfortable with completion as a way of honoring this chapter is now closed. I have done this service. I have given what I was able to give, and now I can move on to something else, as opposed to I must stay, I must stick it out, I must endure whatever these circumstances are, I must endure whatever these conditions are. It really is an act of reclaiming power and liberation for me to be able to say, I am now more okay with completing things. And every completion brings a new opportunity to begin again and to begin again with the lessons from the last chapter.
That's really beautiful. It is true, right? The completion is super important, and we forget that frequently. So you were talking about moving your coaching practice from one to one to group. And one of the things I find often that we kind of underestimate how big the impact will be is the
Mhm,
communities that we're entering. Like,
mhm.
we're always just looking at the coach, like, are they going to do the thing that I want to, like, is the thing that I want going to happen in there? And I find the community is actually a really essential part of that experience. And so I'm curious for you what you saw in entering the community of the mastermind and what you got from those women.
Yes. Being in the company of other passionate, committed women who are up to big and bold things in the world made it so much fun because I was learning from their stories, their lessons, and their brilliance. Left me feeling far less alone in the
Mhm.
challenges that I was facing, knowing that I was not the only one struggling to figure out how did I want to message the offers that I had, and how could I do that in a very authentically aligned voice for me, to know that that's actually a shared theme for many of us, and that it's such an important theme that it's one that you might teach and touch on year after year in these masterminds. And so in the cohort, I noticed there were also some women who were returning year after year, cycle after cycle, to continue learning with you, almost as if there's just this ongoing spiral upward. We might be learning on a theme of marketing or messaging, but there's always a new and a next level. And so to see women who are in a committed practice of intentional growth and who are very committed to building their endeavors, but also reassessing at every point, does this endeavor still make sense for me? Is there a new endeavor I want to embark on? Are there multiple endeavors I want to be pursuing? And to see how people were balancing that with some of their other identities, whether it was as a parent, whether it was as a partner, whether it was as someone who was nearing a retirement from one career into a next. And so to be able to sit with a community of people who were in touch with their identities, who cared about integrating themselves wholly and fully to be able to build the things that they cared about, felt very, very joyful. It felt very supportive. And it felt like a new way of learning that enabled me to feel less alone in what it was that I was building.
Yeah. I feel like that less alone piece is really big because even if you're in, some of the women who I work with are in corporate environments, you can still feel very alone in terms of what you're learning and how you're growing and expanding if other people around you are not doing the same thing. And then as an entrepreneur, obviously, like, you're working on your own typically, and that can feel very isolating. And so then, then you have these communities. And I will say I have those communities too because I reach out to them when I feel that way. I'm like, I'm just sitting here by myself trying to work
Mhm.
through something, and then you can reach out to somebody and then they can keep you really
Yeah.
connected. But I'm curious for you too, you talked about the joyfulness of it, and we do in-person events with the mastermind. And like, what were those like for you to be able to connect in person with them?
Yeah, the in person time really is, I think, what sealed the relationships in a new way, cemented the relationships in a new way, because we were holding a space with each other and also literally holding each other, holding each other as we were walking through either highly emotionally charged and challenging issues, challenges, problems we wanted to work through, or really big and bold visions that we were expressing and sharing out loud for the very first time. And so there were very tender moments in those in person gatherings of being able to declare big dreams, being able to let go of the blocks that we were facing, being able to say, I actually am done and complete with this thing that I at once was very, at one point was very attached to be able to say, no, now I separate from that and I move into something new. That in-person time holding a space for one another, it was a real game changer, and I could see a lot of momentum for us as a cohort after we had been in person together. And I believe you even added some additional in-person time for us over the course of our cohort because you just saw the benefit that it was providing for us. And again, it was an acceleration point when we were able to be together in person.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, during just going back a few years, we were so virtual for so long. And then we very slowly started to come back in. And I went in person pretty early, like in 21, actually. And I noticed it's such a change. Like people just shift so much quicker when they're together than when we do virtual. And not to say that virtual doesn't work, and virtual is very powerful and you can get so much done there. And yeah, like you said, it accelerates a totally next level, which is why we do it for the mastermind. It's one of my favorite things is just being able to
Mm.
get to meet you all in person. And then I'm like, oh, this is what it's like to like give you a squeeze and like talk about your
Mhm.
families and just, see photos and have fun. And, I just loved too with you. Like, I was like, Laura, it's just so much fun. And just like really in person, like it was so great to be with you that way, to just be like, oh, like we're having such an awesome time together. And I love that myself too, just as the coach in that environment.
It's so
Yeah.
cool.
What would you say then for you? Like, so have we covered all your wins? Did we get all of them? Or is there anything else you'd want to add into that category?
Well, there's another really big area of win that I would be remiss if I did not mention it, and
Yeah.
it is in the arena of marriage. So I
Mm.
mentioned earlier that I've been married to my husband for 14 years. We've been together over 20 years, and we've known each other since we were very, very young. We first met each other in high school. And it's funny because my husband and I, when we met in high school, we were not high school sweethearts. We were actually kind of high school enemies because we were in the math club and all these academic clubs. So our very first friendship relationship coming to know each other was actually based in competition. And I share that because now I can look back with a little bit of wisdom on what did that spirit of playful, healthy competition seed in a dynamic that we had with one another that has actually carried on into our marriage, where sometimes, and I'm going to take full responsibility and ownership for this, when I see things as a competition, I'll do things like keep score and call things out when they're not up to a certain standard, or feel like it's a very win lose dynamic, us versus them. And in a true partnership where we're actually on the same team, those competitive dynamics can really get in the way of the shared commitments that we have. And I began to see over the course of the mastermind, working and unpacking some of the challenges in my business, just the deep relationship and connection to marriage, and how so many of the leadership practices, and I do this a lot now and I'm holding space and coaching clients in my practice as well. There's so many connection points between the relationships that we value and the relationship with our work and our business and our profession as well. And so I began to see that the more I let go of some of the dynamics, or the more I acknowledged that I was contributing to these unproductive dynamics in my marriage, the more I began to see the role I had and the power and the opportunity I had to change that dynamic. Regardless of what my husband did do, didn't do, like he could continue on in the way he was. And there was a lot of transformation I could affect just by taking greater responsibility for the ways I was or was not showing up in true care and true choice and true alignment and support of him. So we have had so many upgrades in our marriage, where I'd say we've just gone from this dynamic where I would see things as scarcity and keeping score to now what's the shared commitment? How do we get both of our shared sets of shared needs met? How do we create a game of marriage and rules that really work for us, regardless of what other people say marriage should be? We get to make whatever is going to make us happy, and being in dialogue and being on the same team is what allows us to do that. And feeling that we're supported every step of the way is just a new feeling of freedom that I have as a result of digging into some of those patterns of where I was getting in the way of us having all of that happiness here now for
Yeah.
ourselves.
I think often we underestimate, like, if that's not working in the marriage piece, and it's not something that people typically like to share very publicly, which I understand, right? It's a private relationship. And if you're struggling in your marriage, it really affects everything, like
Yeah.
everything. And marriage partnership, any kind of partnership that's a committed one, if you're not doing well, it will totally bleed over into your business, into your career, into all of these things. And we just tend to forget that. So thank you for sharing that, because I think it's really important for us to remember. And like, this from, because I coach you guys on this, like marriage to me, it's like really important for us to understand how to have a balanced marriage and how to have one that thrives, because I know the cost if it's not going well, and it's huge,
Hmm.
and you can look successful on the surface and still have like a lot of crap happening behind the scenes, and it doesn't feel good. And you can have even more success that feels really aligned if things are cleaned up at home and you feel really good
Right.
about your partnership. And then also too, I'm sure your parenting, you didn't speak about that, but I'm sure that was also affecting your parenting, like all the pieces
Oh,
of
yeah.
the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
And then to be able to be like, "Oh,
Absolutely.
no, like, I know how to operate in a way that feels really good for me, my family, and also my business and my career and my relationships."
Yeah, you're so right. Every major area of my life, from my own body's health and wellness and ability to listen in to what my body needs and craves, to my marriage, to my mothering and parenting, to my communication with my parents, to my business building, to my real estate work and additional investments and wealth creation, wealth building, every area was touched by these leadership lessons and work to integrate within myself that I was able to explore deeply over the course of the year, the mastermind. And I'm so grateful for that because now I know and have as an ongoing standing practice a belief and now through practice this reminder that I can always restore myself to wholeness. And I get to be a coach now that helps others in restoring their wholeness, and that comes from first being in that self practice and self acknowledgement as well, that we can always take what's broken into a practice of reintegration.
Yeah. Well, I love just seeing all because I can think of even more things, and we also, I feel like, have covered the big ones. I was thinking about the trip to Disney and, like, trip
Oh
to New
yeah.
York, and, like, she took all these trips with her family that were just so joyful. We have, like, a communication, we all talk in this group, and she would send us photos from these trips, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, Laura, look at her. She's just having so much fun with her family," and, like, that to me, like, just was such big wins all the time.
Oh, thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were these moments of abundance that I never would have believed possible for us. And again, they were not always things that could have been planned. Some of the things were surprises and happened kind of on a whim and were way more magical because we allowed them as opposed to trying to control our way to it being the perfect plan.
Yeah.
So I have learned a lot about leaving space for the magic.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And Laura, thank you so much for sharing. Laura's such, you're so generous in general. Like, she just messaged me to say thanks for the mastermind. And I just like, I loved hearing from you, just, unprompted what it was that you really had gotten for yourself. And it's such a it's an indicator of your own commitment to really having clarity for yourself, like your own life and what you're getting from things that you're committing to and doing. So I appreciate that so much about you. And yeah,
Thanks.
I'm grateful to you for being part of the mastermind. Each woman is so important to me. And like I feel like all of them, I always miss you all when we're at the completion point of it. So thank you so much for coming on. It's such a joy to see you. And where is the
Oh,
best way for people to reach out and find out more about you?
well, you can find me at piñatapossible.com. I'm on Instagram at piñatapossible, and I'm also on LinkedIn at Laura Saldivar Luna. And I'm so grateful to you, Nicole. Please know just what a difference you've made in my life. And I can't remember if I told you this, but at the time that I invested in your mastermind, I believe it was the most significant monetary investment I had made in my business at that time. And it was so worth it, and the ROI on it was incredibly high, I mean, multiple times over. And it is now my continued standard practice to keep investing in myself in that way as a result of leveling up. So thank you for that invitation to invest. And my hope is that all the women who find their way to you will know that they are worthy of that investment in themselves as well.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Laura. I appreciate you so much. And yeah, thank you. Um, I get to see you again soon, I hope. So thank you for being on here on the School of Self Worth. And we are so excited to see where you go from here.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. Appreciate you so much.